Hi, beautiful people. Thank you for joining us today. Elam, people, are you ready to get shaken or stirred on today's episode?
I'm ready.
What are you sipping on?
I have myself a sweet vermouth. Just on ice.
Okay.
Nothing too crazy.
Yes.
What about you, Ozzy?
I am sipping on a homemade kombucha made by Elam herself. Cheers.
Cheers.
So on today's episode, how's your face said it all?
Ooh, it's a little strong today.
Did it shake you up?
We
Did
might
it
be
wake
getting.
you up?
I'm feeling something by the end of this.
Tell me more. What are we discussing on today's episode?
So last episode we were talking about what's your name. This episode we want to go in a little bit more deeper on who we are. So the question for today is, where are you from?
Where are you from? Well, let's see. Let's set some backdrop more onto that question. I feel like that question always throws me off depending on who asks that question, right? Like, if it's a white person me asking that question, it's like, what's your intention behind that question? Versus if it's a person of color, it's more of, cool, it's a neutral zone because I don't know where you're from either, you know? Like,
Right.
So I don't know, it just, depending who's asking the question, I become weary of like what the intention is or what it could mean, just because of the society and the world that we live in today of our country being so divided. So the fact if a white person's gonna ask me where I'm from, it's more of, what do you mean where I'm from? Can you be more specific around your question? Versus if it's you who's gonna ask me where I'm from, I'm going to say I'm from San Francisco, but my dad is from Mexico, my mom is from Guatemala, I'm Latino, you know? Like, I'm not from there nor from here, I'm just a little bit of everywhere.
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting. I feel like I have the same experience. I think in the last episode I talked about I was born in the Midwest, grew up there until I was 10. And so a lot of the times people would ask me that question, point blank.
Yeah.
They'd be like, where are you from? And I'm so confused, right?
Yeah.
I'm thinking to myself, I was born here. I was born with y'all, you know, in the same little hospital that there's only one there, right? So that same little hospital in that little town was born there. So
What was your reaction when you said that you're from the same place?
they're confused, right? So they're like, what do you mean? No, like, aren't you from North Korea? Or aren't you from like China or something? And it was just nonstop, right? And I kind of sat there and thinking like, what? Like,
Yeah.
like it just doesn't even make sense to me, right? It just because in my mind, I don't think like growing up, I felt this divide of, oh, I'm Asian, I'm a minority in that space because there was not a lot of diversity in the first place, right? And so I don't know, when I got the question, I was confused. I even went home. I remember one time I was asking, what's the answer to where are you from? And they're like,
Who'd you ask?
I think I asked my dad, and he was like, you're born here.
Yeah.
You're from here.
You're from the States.
Yeah, you're from the States. And so there was not a good way to explain this at the time. You know, we're just so young, and I don't think, and I was ignorant. I didn't even know that there was differences. I thought that everyone was the same. And so when people started to ask that, all I knew I wasn't Chinese and I was not from North Korea, because I had to get that clarification from my parents too. I was like, so am I from like North Korea or like South Korea? Right? Was the question that I was asking. And they would be, who's asking that? But you're from South Korea, right? North Koreans cannot be here, right? And so, yeah, I think that question was just one of those things, like, I didn't even realize that there was a difference. And again, it goes back to like the upbringing that I had, the people that I was surrounded by. I didn't have any Asians or someone similar to me. I think when I was talking in the last podcast, I was like, I think there was 3 of us, right? Context. Kansas is a military base. And so Junction City is where I was born. And so there was a lot of military families coming in and out, right? And I think at one point, as I was about to leave, right, it was already set in stone that I was going to move to California. There was a new student, and I was super stoked. When I saw from the distance, they looked just like me. I was so excited. And so lo and behold, I'm trying to like be friends with them. And of course, they're from California. So in my mind, I'm thinking, what are the odds, right? Like God's hands has somehow swapped us, right? One Korean in, one Korean out was what I was thinking, right? But in that split second of like, okay, I'm going to be there with this individual for 1 week overlapping, I thought that was so cool because I had never experienced someone the same age, right? We talked about like 3 other people there. I mean, this is 3 people in different age groups. They weren't in my class. And so when I met her, I was super excited. I wanted to get to know her. Yeah, it didn't go that way. And I soon learned why she was so not friendly towards me.
And why is that?
So when I got to California, I realized that a lot of Koreans, and it may be just where I grew up from, to be fair, they were befriending all of the non-Asians. That was the way to assimilate. That was the cool way, right? The cool kids would be friends with all of the non-Asians. If you were clicking with the Asian people, you are a nerd, right? And that's like how it was. And so when I was approaching this individual, when we were back in elementary school, I think that was part of the tactic. She was a new student mid-year, and she did not want to be close to another Asian from a 10-foot pole, right? Like, I don't want to be near that, right? The cool way to go, the non-Asians, right? And I was the only Asian, and that was a sad thing, right? In my mind, I was like, there's going to be someone like me. I can get to know them. It's going to be amazing. And no, didn't turn out that way. And I think that was the start of a very quick realization when I got to California. Dang, there's going to be a lot of that, right? A lot of, where are you from? You're from North Korea, huh? Right?
Yeah, and I also like to tease that question a bit because I feel like I've mentioned before, right? That question could go so many ways. So when that question is brought up, I like to tease it out and say, well, I'm from San Francisco. And then if someone says, well, where are you really from? It's more about like, are you asking about my ethnic background?
Right.
There's such a difference about where you're from than your ethnic background. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't look like a white American, but I was born in the States. And then for them to clarify whether, like, once I say I'm from San Francisco, it's like, so you were born here? I'm like, well, yeah, I just told you I'm from San Francisco.
Right.
So why clarify whether or not I was born here? That's what throws me off. I just told you where I'm from, and then you still want to ask if I was born here. Why? Mm-hmm. Like, why would I want to lie about where I'm born, where I was born? Like, it just that doesn't, for me, those two don't sync when that question is clarified at that point. There's 2 different questions being asked, and you're trying to pigeonhole me into an identity that doesn't really, I don't know, it doesn't do anyone service at that point. At that point, I'm just turned out from the conversation, and I'm just turning my back at that point. And then you also brought up a good point about like assimilating, because growing up in San Francisco, I went to from elementary school through high school, went to predominantly Black, Latino education system. So never did I feel like I was the other at that point in time. I never felt like I was different because I saw myself in my other peers. I was sitting next to people who looked like me, had similar experiences as I was going through at that point in time. And it wasn't until college where I was like, whoa, like there was only, if I recall correctly, like 10 Latinos in my graduating class, somewhere around there, and I found my niche, but I still felt very uncomfortable being in a classroom setting because at that point, I was one of 15 other students who were then predominantly white, and I was like, whoa, I'm like the only brown guy here. At that point, I felt super uncomfortable. I felt weird about getting up and like doing presentations, right? It just like I didn't have the confidence to sit in front of these folks who, when they did their introductions, is saying along the lines of, my dad is the prime minister of this country and my parents come from this kind of background as well.
Wow.
And I'm just, well, I'm Osvaldo, you know, I come from humble beginnings.
Right.
You know, I don't have much to offer, but here I am sitting in the same classroom as you are. It's just such a different experience being able to, in your regards, right? Like, you grew up with just being different from others, and it wasn't for me until like the age of 18 where I was like, oh, I'm different.
Right. Interesting. And so for you, you had that question of where you're from starting college. Let's fast forward to now, right? When you're out into the workspace, or even when you're meeting new people, do you feel you have that similar questionnaire thrown at you?
It doesn't have the same undertone as I felt like it did in college.
Interesting.
It's more about people just genuinely wanting to know where I'm from. And when I say San Francisco, they're like, oh, you're a unicorn.
Right. Yeah.
So that's a whole different conversation, right?
So it's just taking a positive... I don't even... Yeah, I guess more... Is it fair to say a positive spin, if you will?
I think so, right? Like, at the end of the day, people want to get to know each other. And one of the natural questions to ask someone is, where are you from? Where do you grow up with? And it just gives that kind of historical knowledge of what your childhood was like, right? Like, Kansas City is like, what's out there? You know?
Right? It's just flat.
So it's just, right, you've had a different experience growing up than someone who grew up on the West Coast in an urban city such as San Francisco. Is just two different unique experiences. And now in San Francisco being a transit city, it's more of like, what are you still doing here kind of thing, you know, like all San Franciscans have moved out at this point, or the majority have. So I don't feel like it's the same undertone. If anything, I become weary of being different if I'm in a different state that is not on the coast or any respective coast. If I'm traveling, let's say maybe this happened like 5 years ago. I forget what city it was, but I was in the Midwest, and I was like the only brown guy at this really small airport that I looked around the room and I'm like, oh my God, there's just white people here. And at that point, I've never really acknowledged of being different in an airport setting, just because I'm like, oh, there's TSA, there's security, there's people actually could hold guns in this state. Like, it was just so uncomfortable for me. I'm like, just try to pass or just act normal kind of thing. And
wow.
It just was uncomfortable for me at that point. So, I mean, that's why I just stick to the West or East Coast.
Forget the Midwest.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I think when I was doing some traveling too, I cannot recall which airport I landed on, but there was one that I went in there and I was looking around and I knew I was an outlier immediately. And maybe it's that younger years where I was used to that. It's almost like it's muscle memory, right? You were there, you've experienced it, you know what it's like, and so you just kind of go with it. But it did hit me though, right? It like there was this moment of, whoa, okay, this is different. Wow, this reminds me of back when I was younger. And I didn't feel that way as you did. If anything, I was, well, here we go.
Yeah, that was your
here's our rodeo. And it's so interesting that it was only 10 years of my life, and you got to shave off like the first 5-6 years, right? Where
totally.
You know, but even then, that amount of experiences was enough for me to I guess have that muscle memory. And now, is it a good experience? Did I experience something poor in that moment? Thankfully, no. Like there was nothing of that nature. But one of the things that I did notice was just the stare. You know, when people just go around, they're just looking at you like, what are you doing? You know, the double, triple take. And I'm like, I belong here. You know?
I'm from here.
So let's not do a double, triple take over here. Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, and then what's also interesting is the fact that, yes, I was born in San Francisco, but for example, on my father's side, he's one of 12 children, and my mother's is one of 18 children. And
18. Let's just give it a moment there. I heard 12 first, and I was
Right.
like, okay. 18.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's a massive family, and they come from humble beginnings, and I think that's what attributes to a massive family, right? Back in
Right.
their home countries, because my grandparents, they had their own farms, and they needed that labor force, and their children's were that labor force to work their farm. And now thinking to where I am today, it's, well, I don't know like 90% of my family. I just know the
Wow.
like five aunts who are here in the Bay Area. I literally don't know like 90% of my family. So I don't feel like if I go back, when I do visit family, I feel like I'm just meeting strangers. Like, at that point, where am I from?
Right.
Like,
Right.
I'm not, like, from here because, yeah, we're blood related, but we're breaking bread at dinner table, but I don't feel like we're family.
Right.
And it's just so weird to say that out loud, but it's just the reality of it.
It's hearing what you were saying just now reminds me of the moment when I went back to Korea too. And most of my mom's side of the family is there. Similar to you know, how your family is. And thinking about how everyone would ask, like, where are you from? And I would have to say South Korea. But I had never really properly been there.
Right.
You know, at like maybe 4 or 5, I went there for a tad bit. And then I never went back. And so I think it was around college, I'm going to say. I went back for the first time. And similar to your experience, I didn't feel like I fit into that South Korean cookie cutter place, right? Like that, I feel like there's like this specific image that you're supposed to carry.
Do you have a white American accent when you speak Korean?
That's a really good question. That is a very good question. I don't think so.
Yeah.
But my fellow Koreans, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't
Yeah.
think so. I think the reason why is because my grandma lived with us when we were younger. And so she helped me learn and pick up the Korean very quickly. And if anything now, when I speak Korean, it's probably more broken than anything, but I was quite fluent in it. In terms of the accent, I don't think I have it. But I think they will pick it up that I'm not from Korea immediately.
sure.
Yeah.
I feel like Spanish is my first language, right? And I didn't learn English till I was around 10 or so. So I don't necessarily have a strong accent. I believe I do just because I'm very self-conscious when I speak Spanish. I get feedback. It's like, no, you're like, people get generally confused. Like, wait, I thought you were from the States. Like, how is your accent? How do you not have an accent kind of thing? I'm like, interesting. But then I feel like as though I can't have a complex conversation in Spanish. Like, I just feel like I know the colloquial terms versus in English. Like, if we're in a business meeting, I cannot dominate a business meeting in Spanish. I would be like,
You're like, knock, knock, knock. Hello, is
Google
anyone there?
Translate, como se dice, you know, I'm a no sabo kid. But if I'm just going to have a regular conversation with someone, yeah, I'm going to speak Spanish. I'm going to be able to carry the conversation. But that conversation is just so different than running a meeting in Spanish.
Right.
I would not be able to do that. Like, no.
I think I'm the same way. Yeah, there's no way. There was this idea a lot of people would have. It's like, oh, I want to go work in Korea, right? I was like, no way am I going to be able to handle that. I would not have the business Korean language, that formality in there
Yeah, exactly.
to help me even get through
The
it.
acumen.
Yeah, the acumen is just completely washed.
Or else they're not going to respect you to do business with
Right,
them.
exactly. And so when going back to that question of, you know, when you were in Korea, like, what was that? Like, that experience? I feel like I don't feel like I can relate to South Korean culture.
Mm.
And that's when it comes back to this, where are you from, right? And they go like, yeah, my parents have that. But even then, right? I mean, if we were to call up our parents, would they actually ask that too? Like, what would they answer?
Yeah, I mean, that just makes me think of when I asked my parents, it's like, where do you plan to retire? Are you going back to your home state? Like, what's the ultimate plan? They're like, what am I gonna do back there?
Right. They're like, I live here.
I live here. Like, this is my home. They just spent their last, 30, 40 years living in this country. Going back to their home countries is just going to be another culture shock, as oddly as that sounds. Beautiful people, as you could tell.
I know.
So how are you feeling, I'm Shak'n, Stirr'd. He's still babysitting that drink. Where are we? Your kombucha's great, by the way.
You're welcome. I think I'm feeling a little stirred today.
Yeah.
I think I'm feeling stirred about how that one question, where are you from, has changed and evolved for both of us. And I mean, it was a tricky... It was one of those questions that I hated, honestly, to be really frank, like really didn't like it. And I think hearing how different your experience was versus mine, once again, right? A very interesting journey that we both had as it relates to that one question. What about you, Ozzy? Where are you feeling?
I feel like this conversation's not done yet. I don't know.
It's just the start. I mean, we're only at episode 2.
It's the initial stab at where you're from, because then I feel like I'm very Latino. So it just, I feel so stirred about it, because when I do show up to, like, let's say to a family party, I am very much like on the dance floor. I know how to throw it down.
Right.
Like, I know I am very much Latino. So when you ask me where I'm from, yeah, I'm from San Francisco, but there's so many aspects to me that make me still very much Mexican, Guatemalan, Latino. It's just such a complicated, complex identity that you can't just ask someone where they're from and assume you already know them.
Right. All right, beautiful people, that is a wrap to episode 2. I'm very interested to see what your experience was with the question, where are you from? Until next time, have a good rest of your day. Bye.
Bye.